Finally, the claims about damage to the national security resulting from publication of the aggregate figure for each intelligence agency must be viewed in the light of far more detailed and continuing exposure of the budgets of other agencies vital to the national security. Enormous amounts of information have been provided to the public, for instance, about the work of the Department of Defense and the Atomic Energy Commission. Yet disclosure of funds appropriated and expended by these agencies did not and does not reveal vital national secrets. As Senator Symington noted, quote, "There's nothing secret about the cost of a nuclear aircraft carrier or the cost of the C-5A, end quote. But, quote, knowledge of the cost does not equal knowledge of how the weapons operate or how they would be utilized, end quote. Similarly, knowledge, quote, of the overall cost of intelligence does not in any way entail the release of information about how the various intelligence groups function or plan to function, end quote. Footnote 54. Pausing the reading to read footnote 54. 117th Cong-Rec, or maybe Congressional Records, I'm not sure. PS 42925. Remarks of Senator Symington, as Congressman Leggett of the House Armed Services Committee noted, quote, "We have a book here, the committee report of about 4,000 secrets of the Department of Defense, in which they talk about the money for the SAM-D. But yet, do we know how the SAM-D works? The answer is no. Quote, we have details of the money for Thailand, and it is spelled out. But do we know what the money is actually used for? No. Quote, we can go through the FBI budget. Does that tell us what they are doing? The answer is no, end quote. Cong-Rec H9371, Daily Ed, or Daily Edition. October 1st, 75. Remarks of Rep. Leggett. Resuming the reading. Section E. The argument that publication of any information will inevitably result in demands for further information. Some opponents of budget disclosure, while admitting that publishing aggregate figures for the intelligence community or intelligence agencies will not harm national security, have argued that publication of such figures will inevitably lead to demands for ever more detail. As Director Colby told the House Select Committee on Intelligence, moreover, once the budget total is revealed, the demands for details probably will grow. What does it include? What does it exclude? Why did it go up? Why did it go down? Is it worth it? How does it work? End of page 381. Beginning page 382. There would be revelations, which would gradually reduce the unknown to a smaller and smaller part of the total, permitting foreign intelligence services to concentrate their efforts in areas where we would least like to attract their attention. We, and I specifically mean, in this instance, both intelligence professionals and members of Congress, would have an acute problem when the matter of our budget arose in the floor of the House or Senate. Those who knew the facts would have two unpleasant choices: to remain silent in the face of all questions and allegations, however inaccurate, or to attempt to keep the debate on accurate grounds by at least hinting at the full story. My concern that one revelation will lead to another is based on more than a, quote, feeling, end quote. The atomic weapons budget was considered very sensitive, and the Manhattan Project was concealed completely during World War II. With the establishment of the AEC, however, the decision was made to include in the 1947 budget a one-line item for the weapons account. That limitation was short-lived. By 1974, a 15-page breakout and discussion of the atomic weapons program was being published. Were the intelligence budget to undergo a similar experience, major aspects of our intelligence strategy, capabilities, and successes would be revealed. Footnote 55. Reading footnote 55. William Colby testimony. House Select Committee on Intelligence. August 4th, 75, page 122. Senator McClellan described the consequences of publishing the total budget for national intelligence. Quote, "That is when you intend to put the camel's nose under the tent. That is the beginning. That is the wedge. You say you do not want to know all the details and how the money is spent. But if you get the overall figures of $1 billion, or $500 million, or $5 billion, or whatever, then how are you going to know? How can you evaluate? How can you judge or make an intelligent judgment on whether that is too much or too little, whether it is being expended wisely or unwisely, except when you can get the details? Quote, how? You cannot know. And if you receive these figures, and if you end this ignorance as to the total amount, next you will want to end the ignorance as to the different agencies and how it is spent, and through whom it is spent. Next, will want to end the ignorance of what it is spent for. Next, you want to end the ignorance of how that intelligence is procured. There is no end to it." End quote. Cong Rec. S. 9609, Daily Ed, June 4th, 74. Remarks of Senator McClellan. During the same debate, Senator Humphrey noted that while he did not oppose the purpose of the disclosure of the total budget for national intelligence, quote, "The problem is it is sort of like loose string or a ball of twine, so to speak, that starts to unravel," end quote. ID at S9606, Remarks of Senator Humphrey. During a more recent House debate on the publication of the CIA's budget, Congressman Young described such publication as, quote, "the first baby step," end quote. Cong Rec. H9376, Daily Ed, October 1st, 75. Remarks of Rep. Young. As James Schlesinger told the Select Committee, quote, "But one of the problems here is the camel's nose under the edge of the tent, and I think that is the fundamental problem in the area. There are very few people who can articulately argue that the publication of those figures in and of themselves, if it stopped there, would be harmful. The argument is that then the pressure would build up to do something else. That once you have published, for example, the budget, that the pressures would build up to reveal the kinds of systems that are being bought for that money. And it is regarded as the first step down a slippery slope for those who worry about those kinds of things," end quote. Schlesinger, February 2nd, 76, page 53. End of page 382, beginning page 383. There are several problems with this argument. While there obviously will be pressure the problem, as Mr. Helms agreed, quote, "It is not quote, is not insuperable," incomparable, end quote. Footnote 56. Pausing the reading to read footnote 56. Helms, January 31st, 76, page 39. Resuming the reading. For many years, Congress has refused to reveal the figures for the national intelligence budget and the aggregate budgets of the intelligence agencies. It seems unlikely that, given this past history, Congress will suddenly reverse itself and fail to protect information whose disclosure would harm the national security. Much more likely is that Congress will, as Senator Church proposed, quote, establish very stringent rules when it came to handling the money figures, end quote. Footnote 57. Pausing the reading to read footnote 57. IBID. More importantly, as Congressman Koch noted, the real fear on both sides of the aisle is that some have expressed is, quote, gee, if we do that, that is the first step, end quote. Maybe it is, but whatever the second step is, it is what this House wants it to be. And if this House decides that this is the last step, so be it. If the House decides that it wants to have more information, it will have to have a vote on it. What is wrong with that? That is what is called the democratic system. We are sent here to be part of that system. Footnote 58. Pausing the reading to read footnote 58. Cong Rec H9359 Daily Ed. October 1st, 75. Remarks of Rep. Koch. Resuming the reading. It is instructive to note that in this context the amount of budgetary information provided on the Atomic Energy Commission. That information has constantly increased, yet each step of the way, Congress has had the opportunity to limit disclosure and chose not to. This experience confirms congressional control over the process. More importantly, the national security was not harmed by disclosure of a substantial amount of budgetary information about an agency and a weapons program crucial to the defense of the United States. Finally, the argument is without limits. It could be used to justify much greater secrecy. It could be used to justify the withholding of all information on the Defense Department because information which the Congress wishes to protect would be threatened by pressures caused by the publication of any information on that department. Section F. The argument that the United States should not publish information of its intelligence budget, since no other government in the world does. It has also been argued that the United States should not publish its intelligence budget when no other government in the world does. Footnote 59. William Colby Testimony. House Select Committee on Intelligence. August 4th, 75, page 120. Yet, as Congressman Moss noted, I pointed out to those members who do not know the difference between this country and others, and the fact that we become unique in disclosing this, that. Thank God, we do become unique. We have grown great and maintained our strength as an open society, and we should continue to be an open society to the maximum consistent with our true security requirements. End of page 383, beginning page 384. I do not want us to emulate the Russians or the Chinese or even our British brethren in the operation of various agencies of their governments under their official secrets acts and other areas. I want us to realize the strength that we gain from an alert electorate and informed electorate. Footnote 60. Pausing the reading to read footnote 60. Cong Rec H9363 Daily Ed. October 1st, 75. Remarks of Rep. Moss. Resuming the reading. Section G. Summary and conclusion. The budgetary procedures which presently govern the Central Intelligence Agency and other agencies of the intelligence community prevent most members of Congress, as well as the public, from knowing how much money is spent by any of these agencies, or even how much is spent on intelligence as a whole. In addition, most members of Congress and the public are deceived about the appropriations and expenditures of other government agencies whose budgets are inflated to conceal funds for the intelligence community. The failure to provide this information to the public and to the Congress prevents either from effectively ordering priorities and violates Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, which provides that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. The committee finds that publication of the aggregate figure for national intelligence would begin to satisfy the constitutional requirement and would not damage the national security. While substantial questions remain about the relationship between the constitutional requirement and the national security, the committee recommends the annual publication of the aggregate figure. The committee also recommends that any successor committee study the effects of publishing more detailed information on the budgets of the intelligence agencies. End of page 384, beginning page 385. Chapter 17, Testing and the use of chemical and biological agents by the intelligence community. Under its mandate, footnote 1, the Select Committee has studied the testing and use of chemical and biological agents by intelligence agencies. Pausing the reading to read footnote 1. Senate Resolution 21 directs the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Activities to investigate a number of issues. Quote, A. Whether agencies within the intelligence community conducted illegal domestic activities, Section 2, 1 and 2. Quote, B. The extent to which agencies within the intelligence community cooperate, Section 2, 4, and 8. Quote, C. The adequacy of executive branch and congressional oversight of intelligence activities, Section 2, 7, and 11. D. Quote, the adequacy of existing laws to safeguard the rights of American citizens, Section 2, 13, end quote. Resuming the reading. Detailed descriptions of the programs conducted by intelligence agencies involving chemical and biological agents will be included in a separately published appendix to the Senate Select Committee's report. This section of the report will discuss the rationale for the programs, their monitoring and control of what committee's investigation has revealed about the relationships among the intelligence agencies and about their relations with other government agencies and private institutions and individuals. Footnote 2. Pausing the reading to read footnote 2. The details of these programs may never be known. The programs were highly compartmented. Few records were kept. What little documentation existed for the CIA's principal program was destroyed early in 1973. Resuming the reading. Fears that countries hostile to the United States would use chemical and biological agents against Americans or America's allies led to the development of a defensive program designed to discover techniques for American intelligence agencies to detect and counteract chemical and biological agents. The defensive orientation soon became secondary as the possible use of these agents to obtain information from or gain control over enemy agents become apparent. Research and development programs to find materials which could be used to alter human behavior were initiated in the late 1940s and early 1950s. These experimental programs originally included testing of drugs involving witting human subjects and culminated in tests using unwitting, non-volunteer human subjects. These tests were designed to determine the potential effects of chemical or biological agents when used operationally against individuals unaware that they had received a drug. The testing programs were considered highly sensitive by the intelligence agencies administering them. Few people, even within the agencies, knew of the programs, and there is no evidence that either the executive branch or Congress were ever informed of them. The highly compartmented nature of these programs may be explained in part by an observation made by the CIA Inspector General that the quote, the knowledge that the agency is engaging in unethical and illicit activities, end of page 385, beginning page 386, would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to the accomplishment of its mission, end quote. Footnote 3. Pausing the reading to read footnote 3. CIA Inspector General's Survey of TSD, 1957, page 217. Resuming the reading. The research and development program, and particularly the covert testing programs, resulted in massive abridgments of the rights of American citizens, sometimes with tragic consequences. The deaths of 2 Americans, footnote 3a, can be attributed to these programs. Other participants in the testing programs may still suffer from the residual effects. While some controlled testing of these substances might be defended, the nature of the tests, their scale, and the fact that they were constituted for years after the danger of surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting individuals was known, demonstrate a fundamental disregard for the value of human life. Pausing the reading to read footnote 3a. On January 8, 1953, Mr. Harold Blauer died of circulatory collapse and heart failure following an intravenous injection of a synthetic mescaline derivative while a subject of tests conducted by New York State Psychiatric Institute under a contract led by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. The committee's investigation into drug testing by the U.S. intelligence agencies focused on the testing of LSD. However, the committee did receive a copy of the U.S. Army Inspector General's report, issued on October 1975, on the events and circumstances of Mr. Blauer's death. His death was directly attributable to the administration of the synthetic mescaline derivative. Resuming the reading. The Select Committee's investigation of the testing and use of chemical and biological agents also raised serious questions about the adequacy of command and control procedures within Central Intelligence Agency and military intelligence, about the relationships among the intelligence agencies, other governmental agencies, private institutions and individuals. The CIA's normal administrative controls were waived for programs involving chemical and biological agents to protect their security. According to the head of the audit branch of the CIA, these waivers produced, quote, gross administrative failures, end quote. They provided the CIA's internal review mechanisms, the Office of General Counsel, the Inspector General, and the audit staff from adequately supervising the programs. In general, the waivers had the paradoxical effect of providing less restrictive administration controls and less effective internal review for controversial and highly sensitive projects than those governing normal agency activities. The security of the programs was protected not only by waivers of normal administrative controls, but also by a high degree of compartmentation within the CIA. This compartmentation excluded the CIA's medical staff from the principal research and testing program employing chemical and biological agents. It also may have led to agency policymakers receiving differing and inconsistent responses when they posed questions to the CIA component involved. Jurisdictional uncertainty within the CIA was matched by jurisdictional conflict among the various intelligence agencies. The spirit of cooperation and reciprocal exchanges of information, which initially characterized the programs, disappeared. Military testers withheld information from the CIA, ignoring suggestions for coordination from their superiors. The CIA similarly failed to provide information to the military on the CIA's testing program. This failure to... One moment, I'm going to reread starting from here. Military testers withheld information from the CIA, ignoring suggestions for coordination from their superiors. The CIA similarly failed to provide information to the military on the CIA's testing program. This failure to cooperate was conspicuously manifested in an attempt by the Army to conceal. End of page 386, beginning page 387. Their overseas testing program, which included surreptitious administration of LSD from the CIA. Learning of the Army's program, the agency surreptitiously attempted to obtain details of it. The decision to institute one of the Army's LSD field testing projects had been based, at least in part, on the finding that no long-term residual effects had ever resulted from the drug's administration. The CIA's failure to inform the Army of a death, which resulted from the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting Americans, may well have resulted in the institution of an unnecessary and potentially lethal program. The development, testing, and use of chemical and biological agents by intelligence agencies raises serious questions about the relationship between the intelligence community and foreign governments, other agencies of the federal government, and other institutions and individuals. The questions raised ranged from the legitimacy of American complicity in actions abroad which violate American and foreign laws, to the possible compromise of the integrity of public and private institutions used as cover by intelligence agencies. Section A. The programs investigated. Subsection 1. Project Chatter. Project Chatter was a Navy program that began in the fall of 1947, responding to reports of, quote, amazing results, end quote, achieved by the Soviets in using, quote, truth drugs, end quote. The program focused on the identification and testing of such drugs for use in interrogations and in the recruitment of agents. The research included laboratory experiments on animals and human subjects involving anabasis aphylla, scopolamine, and mescaline in order to determine their speech-inducing qualities. Overseas experiments were conducted as part of the project. The project expanded substantially during the Korean War and ended shortly after the war in 1953. Subsection 2. Project Bluebird / Artichoke. The earliest of the CIA's major programs involving the use of chemical and biological agents, Project Bluebird, was approved by the director in 1950. Its objectives were A. Discovering means of conditioning personnel to prevent unauthorized extraction of information from them by known means. B. Investigating the possibility of control of an individual by application of special interrogation techniques. C. Memory enhancement. And D. Establishing defensive means for preventing hostile control of agency personnel. Footnote 4. CIA Memorandum to the Select Committee, quote, Behavioral Drugs and Testing, end quote. February 2nd, 75. Resuming the reading. As a result of the interrogations conducted overseas during the project, another goal was added: the evaluation of offensive uses of unconventional interrogation techniques, including hypnosis and drugs. In August 1951, the project was renamed Artichoke. Project Artichoke included in-house experiments on interrogation techniques, conducted, quote, under medical and security controls, which would ensure, end of page 387, beginning page 388, that no damage was done to individuals who volunteer for the experiments, end quote. Footnote 5. Overseas interrogations utilizing a combination of sodium pentothal and hypnosis after physical and psychiatric examinations of the subjects were also part of Artichoke. Pausing the reading to read footnote 5. Memorandum from Robert Taylor, O/DD/P, to the Assistant Deputy, Inspection and Security, and Chief of the Medical Staff, March 22nd, 52. Resuming the reading. The Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, which studied scientific advances by hostile powers, initially led Bluebird/Artichoke efforts. In 1952, overall responsibility for Artichoke was transferred from OSI to the Inspection and Security Office, I&SO, predecessor to the present Office of Security. The CIA's technical services and medical staffs were to be called upon as needed. OSI would retain liaison function with other government agencies. Footnote 6. The change in leadership from an intelligence unit to an operating unit apparently reflected a change in emphasis, from the study of actions by hostile powers to the use, both for offensive and defensive purposes, of special interrogation techniques, primarily hypnosis and truth serums. Pausing the reading to read footnote 6. Memorandum from H. Marshall Chadwell, Assistant Director, Scientific Intelligence, to the Deputy Director/Plans, DDP, quote, Project Artichoke, end quote, August 29th, 52. Resuming the reading. Representatives from each agency unit involved in Artichoke met almost monthly to discuss their progress. These discussions included the planning of overseas interrogations, footnote 8, as well as other experimentation in the U.S. Pausing the reading to read footnote 8, quote, Progress Report, Project Artichoke, end quote, January 12th, 53. Resuming the reading. Information about Project Artichoke after the fall of 1953 is scarce. The CIA maintains that the project ended in 1956, but evidence suggests that the Office of Security and Office of Medical Services use of, quote, special interrogation, end quote, techniques continued for several years thereafter. Subsection 3. MK Naomi. MK Naomi was another major CIA program in this area. In 1967, the CIA summarized the purposes of MK Naomi. A. To provide for a covert support base to meet clandestine operational requirements. B. To stockpile severely incapacitating and lethal materials for the specific use of TSD, Technical Services Division. C. To maintain an operational readiness and unique items for the dissemination of biological and chemical materials. D. To provide for the required surveillance, testing, upgrading, and evaluation of materials and items in order to assure absence of defects and complete predictability of results to be expected under operational conditions. Footnote 9. Pausing the reading to read footnote 9. Memorandum from Chief TSD/Biological Branch to Chief TSD. Quote, MK Naomi. Funding, objectives, and accomplishments, end quote. October 1867. Page 1. For a fuller description of MK Naomi and the relationship between CIA and SOD, see page 360, FF. Resuming the reading. Under an agreement reached with the Army in 1952, the Special Operations Division, SOD, at Fort Detrick was to assist in developing, testing, and maintaining biological agents and delivery. End of page 388. Beginning page 389. Systems. By this agreement, CIA acquired the knowledge, skill, and facilities of the Army to develop biological weapons suited for CIA use. SOD developed darts coated with biological agents and pills containing several different biological agents, which could remain potent for weeks or months. SOD also developed a special gun for firing darts coated with a chemical which could allow CIA agents to incapacitate a guard dog, enter an installation secretly, and return the dog to consciousness when leaving. SOD scientists were unable to develop a similar incapacitant for humans. SOD also physically transferred to CIA personal biological agents in quote bulk end quote form and delivery devices, including some containing biological agents. In addition to the CIA's interest in biological weapons for use against humans, it also asked SOD to study use of biological agents against crops and animals. In its 1967 memorandum, the CIA stated, 3 methods and systems for carrying out a covert attack against crops and causing severe crop loss have been developed and evaluated under field conditions. This was accomplished in anticipation of a requirement which was later developed but was subsequently scrubbed just prior to putting into action. Footnote 9A. Pausing the reading to read footnote 9A. IBID page 2. Resuming the reading. MK Naomi was terminated in 1970. On November 25, 1969, President Nixon renounced the use of any form of biological weapons that kill or incapacitate and ordered the disposal of existing stocks of bacteriological weapons. On February 14, 1970, the President clarified the extent of his earlier order and indicated that toxins, chemicals that are not living organisms but are produced by living organisms, were considered biological weapons subject to his previous directive and were to be destroyed. Although instructed to relinquish control of material held for the CIA by SOD, A CIA scientist acquired approximately 11 grams of shellfish toxin from SOD personnel at Fort Detrick, which were stored in a little-used CIA laboratory where it went undetected for 5 years. Footnote 10. Pausing the reading to read footnote 10. Senate Select Committee, September 1675. Hearings, Volume 1. Resuming the reading. Subsection 4. MK Ultra. MK Ultra was the principal CIA program involving the research and development of chemical and biological agents. It was, quote, concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior, end quote. Footnote 11. Pausing the reading to read footnote 11. Memorandum from the CIA Inspector General to the Director, July 26, 63. Resuming the reading. In January 1973, MK Ultra records were destroyed by Technical Services Division personnel, acting on the verbal orders of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, Chief of TSD. Dr. Gottlieb has testified, and former Director Helms has confirmed, that in ordering the records destroyed, Dr. Gottlieb was carrying out the verbal order of the then Director of Central Intelligence, Helms. MK Ultra began with a proposal from the Assistant Deputy Director for Plans, Richard Helms, to the DCI, outlining a special. End of page 389, beginning page 390. Funding mechanism for highly sensitive CIA research and development projects that study the use of biological and chemical materials in altering human behavior. The projects involved research to develop a capability in the covert use of biological and chemical materials. This area involves the production of various physiological conditions which could support present or future clandestine operations. Aside from the offensive potential, the development of comprehensive capability in this field of covert chemical and biological warfare gives us a thorough knowledge of the enemy's theoretical potential, thus enabling us to defend ourselves against a foe who might not be as restrained in the use of these techniques as we are. Footnote 12. Pausing the reading to read footnote 12. Memorandum from ADDP Helms to DCI Dulles, April 3rd, 53, Tab A, pages 1 to 2. Resuming the reading. MK Ultra was approved by the DCI on April 13, 1953, along the lines proposed by ADDP Helms. Part of the rationale for the establishment of this special funding mechanism was its extreme sensitivity. The Inspector General's survey of MK Ultra in 1963 noted the following reasons for this sensitivity. A. Research in the manipulation of human behavior is considered by many authorities in medicine and related fields to be professionally unethical. Therefore, the reputation of professional participants in the MK Ultra program are on occasion in jeopardy. B. Some MK Ultra activities raise questions of legality implicit in the original charter. C. A final phase of the testing of MK Ultra products places the rights and interests of U.S. citizens in jeopardy. D. Public disclosure of some aspects of MK Ultra activity could induce serious adverse reaction in U.S. public opinion, as well as stimulate offensive and defensive action in this field on the part of foreign intelligence services. Footnote 13. Pausing the reading to read footnote 13. IG Report on MK Ultra, 1963 pages 1 to 2. Resuming the reading. Over the 10-year life of the program, many, quote, additional avenues to the control of human behavior, end quote, were designed as appropriate for investigation under the MKUltra Charter. These include quote, radiation, electroshock, various fields of psychology, psychiatry, sociology, and anthropology, graphology, harassment substances, and paramilitary devices and materials, end quote. Footnote 14. Footnote 14, IBID page 4. Resuming the reading. The research and development of materials to be used for altering human behavior consisted of 3 phases. First, the search for materials suitable for study. Second, laboratory testing on voluntary human subjects in various types of institutions. Third, the application of MKUltra materials in normal life settings. The search for suitable materials was conducted through standing arrangements with specialists in universities, pharmaceutical houses, hospitals, state and federal institutions, and private research organizations. End of page 390, beginning page 391. The annual grants of funds to these specialists were made under ostensible research foundation auspices, thereby concealing the CIA's interest from the specialist's institution. The next phase of the MKUltra program involved physicians, toxicologists, and other specialists in mental, narcotics, and general hospitals and in prisons. Utilizing the products and findings of the basic research phase, they conducted intensive tests on human subjects. One of the first studies was conducted by the National Institute of Mental Health. This study was intended to test various drugs, including hallucinogenics, at the NIMH Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky. The, quote, Lexington Rehabilitation Center, end quote, as it was then called, was a prison for drug addicts serving sentences for drug violations. The test subjects were volunteer prisoners who, after taking a brief physical examination and signing a general consent form, were administered hallucinogenic drugs. As a reward for participation in the program, the addicts were provided with the drug of their addiction. LSD was one of the materials tested in the MKUltra program. The final phase of LSD testing involved surreptitious administration to unwitting non-volunteer subjects in normal life settings by undercover officers of the Bureau of Narcotics acting for CIA. The rationale for such testing was, quote, that testing of materials under accepted scientific procedures fails to disclose the full pattern of reactions and attributions that may occur in operational situations, end quote. Footnote 15. Pausing the reading to read footnote 15, IBID page 21. Resuming the reading. According to the CIA, the advantage of the relationship with the Bureau was that test subjects could be sought and cultivated within the setting of narcotics control. Some subjects have been informers or members of suspect criminal elements from whom the, in brackets, Bureau of Narcotics, end brackets, has obtained results of operational value through the tests. On the other hand, the effectiveness of the substances on individuals at all social levels, high and low, Native American and foreign, is of great significance, and testing has been performed on a variety of individuals within these categories. in brackets, emphasis added, in brackets, footnote 16. Pausing the reading to read footnote 16, IBID pages 11 to 12. Resuming the reading. A special procedure designated MK Delta was established to govern the use of MK Ultra materials abroad. Such materials were used on a number of occasions. Because MK Ultra records were destroyed, it is impossible to reconstruct the operational use of MK Ultra materials by the CIA overseas. It had been determined that the use of these materials abroad began in 1953 and possibly as early as 1950. Drugs were used primarily as an aid to interrogations, but MK Ultra/MK Delta materials were also used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes, according to an Inspector General's survey of the Technical Services Division of the CIA. In 1957, an inspection which did not discover the MK Ultra project, involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting, non-volunteer, end of page 391, beginning page 392, subjects. The CIA had developed 6 drugs for operational use, and they had been in use in 6 different operations on a total of 33 subjects. Footnote 17. By 1963, the number of operations and subjects had increased substantially. In the spring of 1963, during a wide-ranging Inspector General survey of the Technical Services Division, a number of the Inspector General's staff, John Vance, learned about MK Ultra and about the project involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting, non-voluntary human subjects. As a result of the discovery and the Inspector General's subsequent report, that this testing was halted and much tighter administrative controls were imposed on the program. According to the CIA, the project was decreased significantly each budget year until its complete termination in the late 1960s. Subsection 5. The testing of LSD by the Army. There were 3 major phases in the Army's testing of LSD. In the first, LSD was administered to more than 1,000 American soldiers who volunteered to be subjects in chemical warfare experiments. In the second phase, Material Testing Program EA 1729, 95 volunteers received LSD in clinical experiments designed to evaluate potential intelligence uses of the drug. In the third phase, Projects Third Chance and Derby Hat, 16 unwitting non-volunteer subjects were interrogated after receiving LSD as part of operational field tests. Section B. CIA drug testing programs. Subsection 1. The rationale for the testing programs. The late 1940s and early 1950s were marked by concern over the threat posed by the activities of the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and other communist bloc countries. The United States' concern over the use of chemical and biological agents by these powers was acute. The belief that hostile powers had used chemical and biological agents in interrogations, brainwashing, and in attacks designed to harass, disable, or kill Allied personnel created considerable pressure for a, quote, defensive, end quote, program to investigate chemical and biological agents so that the intelligence community could understand the mechanisms by which these substances worked and how their effects could be defeated. Footnote 18. Pausing the reading to read footnote 18. Thus, an officer in the Office of Security of the CIA stressed the, quote, urgency of the discovery of techniques and method that would permit our personnel, in the event of their capture by the enemy, to resist or defeat enemy interrogation, end quote. Minutes of the Artichoke Conference of October 22nd, 53. Resuming the reading. Of particular concern was the drug LSD. The CIA had received reports that the Soviet Union was engaged in intensive efforts to produce LSD, and that the Soviet Union had attempted to purchase the world's supply of the chemical. As one CIA officer who was deeply involved in the work with this drug described the climate of the times, quote, in brackets, it, end brackets, is awfully hard in this day and age to reproduce how frightening all this was to us at the time, particularly after the drug scene has become as widespread and as knowledgeable in this country as it did. But we were literally terrified, because this was the one material that we, end of page 392, beginning page 393, had ever been able to locate, that really had potential, fantastic possibilities if used wrongly, end quote. Footnote 19. Pausing the reading to read footnote 19. Testimony of CIA officer, November 21st, 75, page 33. Resuming the reading. But the defensive orientation soon became secondary. Chemicals and biological agents were to be studied in order, quote, to perfect techniques for the abstraction of information from individuals, whether willing or not, end quote. And in order to, quote, develop means for the control of the activities and mental capabilities of individuals, whether willing or not, end quote. Footnote 20. Pausing the reading to read footnote 20. Memorandum from the Director of Security to Artichoke representatives. Subject, quote, Artichoke restatement of program, end quote. Resuming the reading. One agency official noted that drugs would be useful in order to, quote, gain control of bodies, whether they were willing or not, end quote, in the process of removing personnel from Europe in the event of a Soviet attack. Footnote 21. Pausing the reading to read footnote 21. Artichoke Memorandum, July 30th, 53. Resuming the reading. In other programs, the CIA began to develop, produce, stockpile, and maintain operational readiness materials which could be used to harass, disable, or kill specific targets. Footnote 22. Pausing the reading to read footnote 22. The Inspector General's report of 1957 on the Technical Services Division noted that, quote, 6 specific products have been developed and are available for operational use. 3 of them are discrediting and disabling materials which can be administered unwittingly and permit the exercise of a measure of control over the actions of the subject, end quote. The memorandum for the Chief, TSD, Biological Branch to the Chief, TSD, October 1867, described 2 of the objectives of the CIA's Project MK Naomi as, quote, to stockpile severely incapacitating and lethal materials for the specific use of end quote, and, quote, to maintain in operational readiness special and unique items for the dissemination of biological and chemical materials, end quote. Resuming the reading. Reports of research and development in the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and the Communist bloc countries provided the basis for the transmutation of American programs from a defensive to an offensive orientation. As the chief of the medical staff of the Central Intelligence Agency wrote in 1952, there is ample evidence in the reports of innumerable interrogations that the communists were utilizing drugs, physical duress, electroshocks, and possibly hypnosis against their enemies. With such evidence, it is difficult not to keep from becoming rabid about our apparent laxity. We are forced by this mounting evidence to assume a more aggressive role in the development of these techniques, but must be cautious to maintain strict inviolable control because of the havoc that could be wrought by such techniques in unscrupulous hands. Footnote 23. Pausing the reading to read footnote 23. Memorandum from the Chief of the Medical Staff, January 25th, 52. Resuming the reading. In order to meet the perceived threat to the national security, substantial programs for the testing and use of chemical and biological agents, including projects involving the surreptitious administration of LSD to unwitting non-volunteer subjects, quote, at all social levels, high and low, Native American and foreign, end quote, were conceived and implemented. These programs resulted in substantial violations of the rights of individuals within the United States. End of page 393. Beginning page 394. And here is where I will stop for this recording.